We are all on a road, a journey. Some are on a road to community or a sense of self-worth. Others are on a road to recovery or discovering their faith. No matter what road you find yourself on, this series is to help you know you're not alone, and that Jesus will not only help you overcome the obstacles you'll face along the way, but will navigate you to redemption only found in Him.
Good morning. I'm Bryan Feathers. I've been a part of the church since April of 15. I grew up in the Allegheny section of the Appalachian Mountains. A coal community. And the little town I grew up in was about 5,000 people, and then surrounding communities added to that. And in that town and surrounding communities, we had 14 Catholic churches. How many of you observe or celebrate or do something through the Lenten season? Okay? Not very many of us. I was introduced to Lent not through my theological heritage, but through kids at school. So many of it was a Polish town and heavily Catholic, and therefore many of those that I went to school with in early years would have giving something up for Lent. And I observed a few things about that. One, it was strange to me, but two, they would give up candy usually in the early years for Lent. And I didn't recognize there were some things about that worked, because I figured out they would give up candy during the Lenten season, and then on Easter, Tony, this is probably true, isn't it? Those Catholic Easter baskets far outweighed those of us who were in the Protestant community. And so there was something about that. But I never really became good through my young years observing Lent. It was not something stressed in our home. But I went into pastoral life and theologically was helping define myself. By the way, you do need to allow God to keep speaking to you through the years. And I learned that the seasons of the church year were important, and I began yielding something for Lent. And it became public because I would talk about Lent, but we never had church-wide doing this. But what happens is it filters into children's church. And so it became very apparent what Pastor Feathers was giving up for Lent. And I made a big mistake one year. I gave up complaining. And it was not a good idea. I will never do it again. A few years ago, I gave up coffee. It affected Brenda more than it did me. And she's never gotten over that. So I won't do that again either. It was something we did communally, and when I stopped, I just stopped for Lent and then picked back up. But at any rate, there's nothing more demoralizing than having a 10-year-old catch you after church or in the line or in front of somebody and say, "Pastor Feathers, I do believe that's complaining." And so I was glad for the Lenten season to come to a close that year. We'll talk a little more about Lent later on. Let me say up front, there are those in the room who know the story I'm about to tell all too well. You've lived it or are living it. Some or all of it in your own self or through caring for someone else. And I want you to know that the writing of it has produced tears. It's a story of pain, isolation, a story that I hope helps us forward on this road to community as we travel together during Lent. I could have known him from the early pastoral days when I was assigned Sunday afternoon nursing home service. But I think that many of us know someone just like him. He spent most of his day reviewing his life. He had nothing else to do. He concentrated too much on the losses. There were so many of them. But he would get caught grinning sometimes, just every once in a while as he remembered being young. He was the youngest of several children. The baby of the family title provided him with doting sisters, tormenting brothers, and much more relaxed parents. He remembered racing his bicycle around the block against the two boys, brothers, who always lost. He remembered sisters defending him when he had redlined the mischievous gauge. He remembered his dad scolding him and grinning at the same time. He remembered his mom cradling him in the overstuffed chair long after his legs bent at the knees and dangled off the armrest. After all, he was her baby. He remembered loving the games of baseball and soccer. Really, he was a natural at any sport: basketball, tennis, golf, you name it. The more rough and tumble, the better they suited him, and he was always a star. He remembered his first love. They became inseparable, making all the life plans of late adolescence. It's only funny to us that are older, right? Yeah. Then. Now that is a very large life word. Things began slipping out of his fingers. His legs felt heavy. The tremors began. He doubled down, watched his diet, worked out for more strength, only for the tremors to increase, his grip to fail, his legs to grow weaker, and he began then to stumble over his words. After many visits to the doctor and medications with horrible side effects, he was experiencing increased weakness and intensified symptoms. His parents listened with him as the prognosis, "nothing can be done," was spoken. There were tears and more double downs. The losses were not all immediate, but came anyway. Sports were first, he just couldn't play. But he chose to be the best spectator ever. After a while, he could not absorb the energy it took to attend. His love, she'd been going out with friends on Friday evenings instead of sitting with him. Then she stopped coming. Eventually, he lost his independence, too. After a long time, Dad died. Then Mom. Some said it was the result of being his caretaker, and the guilt he felt for that just wreaked havoc on his mental state. His siblings, he was their baby brother. They loved him. But they were juggling careers and children. Caring for him was draining them too. So he made the decision to come here and live out his deteriorating days. nowadays are spent in the jerry chair, waiting to die. Then one day, someone leans over him asking, "Can I help you?" In halting words, he answers, "There is no hope for me. I have no one." You find his story in John chapter 5, verses 1 through 13. Afterward, Jesus returned from Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, and paralyzed, lay on those porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him, he knew he'd been ill for a long time. And he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" At first, when you read that, you say, "What kind of question is that?" But pay attention to the answer. "I can't, sir," the sick man said, "for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone also always gets there ahead of me." Jesus told him, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." Instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. But this miracle happened on the Sabbath. So the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, "You can't work on the Sabbath. The law does not allow you to carry that sleeping mat." But he replied, "The man who healed me, he told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" "Who said such a thing as that?" they demanded. And the man did not know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. Back to Lent. I think Lent is the story of Jesus' ministry life. It's the entire gospel account wrapped up in the 46 days of the season. It's the pause, the stutter step, if you will, that brings us to think of God self-emptying for real presence with humanity. I think Lent leads me into the mantra, "His name is Emmanuel, God with us. He came to be with us," more than Advent does. Advent's the grand announcement. The trumpets are blowing and the Christmas wreaths are out. But there are no decorations for Lent. It's the grand announcement of his coming. But Lent is what God looks like living among us. He denies himself. He reduces himself. He exposes himself. He leaves his station behind. He absorbs humanity. He buries a father. He takes on humiliation, pain, sadness, loneliness, and grief. He dies himself. We think about this over the course of 6.5 weeks ending on Easter Sunday. It's a revolving reminder. Thursday and Friday lead to Sunday. Death leads to resurrection. It's like the 6 days of creation lead to the 7th day of rest. The 6 walks around Jericho leading to the 1 walk of falling walls. The 6 seals of Revelation in human history leading to the 1 seal of the living God. It's the 6 Sundays of temporal resurrection, this being the first of them, leading to the 7th Sunday of ultimate resurrection. I have a couple of very favorite authors that are Catholic. They speak to it differently than we do sometimes. One is Richard Rohr, and in his book, The Universal Christ, he writes, "I want to enlarge your view of resurrection from a one-time miracle in the life of Jesus that asks for assent and belief to a pattern of his creation that has always been true." Resurrection is another word for change, which we tend to see only in the long run. In the short run, it often looks like death. I step away this far, I'm not in my notes. Brennan Manning is the author I like otherwise. I came to like him even more, but I found his first book as I dealt with pastoral life, The Ragamuffin Gospel. Brennan Manning is his chosen name. He had a priestly name because he, like Richard Rohr, was a Catholic priest. I read his writings and thought I really like what he has to say, and so I did a little bit of investigation about him and discovered that he was a priest in Evansburg, Pennsylvania, the county seat of Cambria County, in which was nestled the little town of Portage in which I grew up. A classmate of mine would drag me to church services with him, and he would go with me. And we would go and listen to this Catholic priest, this father who was captivating hearts and minds in Evansburg, Pennsylvania. And I found out it was this Catholic priest that I would go and listen to, and some of the things he would say be surprised by, and his name now is, he's passed on, Brennan Manning. But the piece I'm about to read to you, I put into every funeral sermon. Now, here's where I'm going to pause. I was standing here singing this morning, and I thought of something that I do because of something we sang, and now I can't remember what it was that we sang. But that's okay. How I remember this, I don't know. Astrophysicists say every breath you take involves molecules that have been breathed by every person that ever lived. And I make it a practice most evenings before I begin prayer to sit in Brenda's chair. I think she knows I do this. Not the other part of it, sitting in her chair. If Lent represents what God looks like living among us, he was here. And he breathed like we breathe. And before I try speaking to him, I try to get a sense of him. That was all for free. Brennan Manning writes in his Ragamuffin Gospel, death and resurrection are not one-time events that occur only at the end of our journey. They are the pattern of our lives day after day. Each time we let go of the past to embrace the future, we relive the Easter journey of Jesus in our flesh. Each time we allow our fears or selfishness to die, we break through to new life. Each time we open ourselves to the Spirit so that He can break down the walls of separation and suspicion and bitterness, we come home to ourselves, the community, and to the Lord. And almost in footnote form, he then wrote, "I die daily," said Paul, "but daily I am raised up to new life." I like the little undo button in word processing and those kinds of things. When you put the wrong number in, you hit undo, it disappears, and you can start over. But the next phrase, I typed it out and I sat there and I looked at it and I hit the undo button until it disappeared. And then I sat there and thought about it for a little bit and I hit the redo button and put it all back in. And I read it through a couple more times, and I do it that way because I would never remember to write it the same again. And I undid it again and took it out. And I sat there and I read the paragraph ahead of it and what Brendan Manning had to say, and I decided maybe, and I hit the redo button and put it back in. And then I was ready to hit the undo button again and take it out, and I decided, just save this thing, close out, think about this for a while, because I want you to know I've struggled with this too. I think people who can never die on Thursday and Friday never experience the resurrection of Sunday. But that is always the road to community. It's the constant dying of self for the other. That's what the observance of Lent is all about. Jesus comes into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. For us, that's Resurrection Sunday. And goes to the nursing home. And there he encounters a man whose body has been deteriorating for 38 years. I think Jesus did this all the time. Every town and every burg had a place like this. Still does. When I read between the lines, Jesus kneels down beside the man laying on a mat on the ground. He leans into him. He puts his arm around him, under his shoulders, cradles him against his chest, kisses him on the forehead, and whispers, "My name is Emmanuel, God with us. And I came to be with you. Can I help you?" And the man's answer says it all. "I have no one." I want you to get the tenderness of this moment. Too often we can read passages and forget there is this wonderful human element that comes in the form of Jesus. So forget a miracle commanding, voice demanding, "Rise up, take up your bed, and get out of here." I think a tear runs out of the corner of the man's eye into the crook in Jesus' arm, while a tear falls from the cheek of Jesus onto the man's cheek and eventually lands in the exact same spot between them. It's the eye-to-eye stirring of the waters, so to speak. And Jesus whispers to him again, "My name is Emmanuel, God with us, and I came to be with you. Can I help you?" And the stirring of the water, not in the pool, was his healing. Her name was Susie Van Duzer. When I met her, I was in my very, very early 30s. And she was already struggling with the incapacities of Alzheimer's. By the time I was in my mid-40s, she was in its later stages. My custom was that we would serve communion one Sunday a month, and then I would take it to shut-ins and nursing homes and those that were a part of our congregation but could not be there. And Susie had come to a place of great physical incapacitation. And so serving her communion meant fixing the cup, the bread, putting my arm under her shoulder, holding her up. She would lean her head against my shoulder, and I would feed her the bread and then the cup. I would kiss her on the forehead, and I think Susie knew who I was and loved me. On one of those occasions, the lady who shared her room on and off looked at me and said, "Would you do that for me? I have no one to hug me." The road to community will most likely connect you with people unlike yourself. I wonder about something that's not in the text. Should be, I think. If he laid there all that time, where were those who did get into the waters ahead of him when they were troubled? Why didn't they come back and help the people that had been just like a few moments ago? Can it be that we really too rarely think of the other? The mad dash into the water had nothing to do with others. This is my time. And then they were gone. Is it possible that the real seeker of community in this text is revealed as Jesus, as much as he is revealed as the benefactor of community as well? Meaning he both looks for it, comes for it. His name is Emmanuel, God with us, and he came to be with us. Is it possible he was both the seeker of and the benefactor of community? I think the road to community is traveled by connecting people with thoughts deeper than your own. If everybody agrees with you, find new friends. If nobody agrees with you, get some. True? That was free too. Yeah. But the road to community is traveled by connecting with people with thoughts deeper than your own, to people who are not just like you, to people whose need is deep and life is hard. It is a road, when traveled, that makes you both seeker and benefactor. The road to community always asks, what are you willing to yield for the benefit of others? The question is not, are you willing to submit to the will of others? But what are you willing to yield for the benefit of others? I asked just a bit ago, where are those who had gotten into the pool ahead of this man? Where'd they gone? So I need to come back and remind you, there is real community found in the people of God. Mark chapter 2 records 4 men who climbed on a roof with a bed, tore a hole in it, and lowered it down in front of Jesus for one of their friends. They yielded a lot to get him there. So it has something to do with what are you willing to yield? Somewhere during the Lenten seasons, I had a son who turned 12 and entered into the youth group. And about that year, one of the Sunday school teacher of that youth group decided that they were going to communally celebrate Lent like Pastor Feathers celebrated Lent by giving something up. And they did the younger piece of, we're going to give up candy and soda and potato chips and a whole host of snacks. I think that's a dumb idea. Okay, that's 4. That's a dumb idea. This year, I gave up sodas. Brenda said, "You don't drink that much soda." And she's right. But when I want it, I want it. Okay? And I gave up some sweets. And last night, talking to me about birthday cake for Dad, whose birthday is today. And I said, "Yeah, I can eat birthday cake." And the words came out, "We thought you gave up sweets for Lent." I said, "I gave up some sweets." That means I can decide which ones. It's not quite that loose on here. But my son does his investigation. He comes to me, he says, "Dad, you're talking about this 40 days of prayer and fasting." And he said, I've counted the days of Lent, and there are 46 of them. I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "It depends on what tradition you're working off of." Most of my Catholic friends, Lent ended on Wednesday before Maundy, Thursday. So Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, or Friday and Saturday, would have been eliminated from Lent. They were not a part of it. They would have fasted anyway. But I said, so they had those 43, 44 days. But he said, "You say 40. I said, "Well, yes. In our tradition, Sunday is always Resurrection Day. It's always Resurrection Day." And he says, "What's that mean?" And I said, "Well, the Bible says when you have the bridegroom with you, you do not fast. And it's a day of celebrating the resurrection of Christ, and we do it every week, and we do it over and over." And he said, "So what's that mean?" And I said, "Well, there are 40 days of prayer and fasting because Sundays," and he could fill in the blanks, "don't count." I said, "Well, no, that's not quite true. But what it means is we don't necessarily fast on Sundays. We do these 40 days. And much to my chagrin, the Sunday school teacher ran with this thing, and on Sunday morning brought in a case of soda and a box full of treats, and the teen group really celebrated Lent that day. It's really not whether or not we follow these things litigiously. It's a matter of understanding what the season is about and what we're looking for. And in the road to community, you always have to ask yourself, what are you willing to yield for others? The road to community ignores humanity's approval or judgment in favor of witness. What's this about? Jesus walks into the nursing home. He looks at a man and says, "Get up and walk." He tells him to roll his mat up and take it and go. It was against all the rules. But being with him was more important than anything else that was going on. So the road to community ignores humanity's approval or judgment in favor of witness. You read the rest of this man's story in John chapter 5, you'll be disappointed to know most others were not nearly as impressed with his healing as he was. I think we are too often worried about letting someone else into our community. They just might mess it up. And God never does that to us. The road to community, genuine community, really leads to one person. His name is Emmanuel. I think We get so busy chasing community in anything and everything, we forget where it's really found. Community is not automatic. Community is not a gathering. Community is not to be found in social media. And since I've stepped in it, that is not going to make you friends. Community is how we interchange with each other as we live as Emmanuel in this present world. You are Emmanuel, and you are Emmanuel, and you are Emmanuel. We are his presence in the world around us. And here's how it went. Jesus held him, wept over him, whispered to him, healed him, and then melted into the woodwork. That doesn't sound like what I think community ought to be. But let's ask ourselves, did he yield what he needed to yield to care for that person at that time? And yes, he did. Theology leaves some things empty. You cannot explain his presence. You have to experience it. Listen to me. You cannot parse words, translate passages, and come up with the one in the chair beside you. His name is Emmanuel, God with us. He came to be with us. He is the point. He is the message. He is the one thing we should never miss, but often do. You will always miss him when you look to the rules or spiritual laws. You see, as soon as the man by the pool of Bethesda encountered the religious leaders of the day, and they told him the rules, he almost missed him. You will always miss him when judgment, not justice, is your cause. You will always miss him when you fuss over the meaning of words written or spoken rather than the person. Or shall we say, the person. In him is found the answer to real community. God's love in the person of Emmanuel, God with us. I like how John comes back in his Revelation, chapter 7 and 8, to talk about this thing I think he meant to say, community. I think it's found in Meatloaf's song, Where Angels Sing. I don't recommend going home and listening to all his music, but this one's worth it. He wrote it for his dying mother, and I think it comes right out of this passage. He may say it's not, but I think. Then one of the 24 elders asked me, "Who are those clothed in white? Where did they come from?" And I said to him, "Sir, you are the one who knows." Then he said to me, "These are the ones who came out of the great suffering. They have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb and made them white. That is why they stand in front of God's throne and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will give them shelter. They will never again be hungry or thirsty. They will never be scorched by the heat of the sun. For the Lamb on the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of life-giving water, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes." John didn't mean someday down the road. He's here now. You have this now. It's not tomorrow. It's now. It's now. For all of us on this road to community, his name is Emmanuel. He came to be with us. His coming expresses his love and the first answer for every yearning on your heart to this road to community. I haven't said a word about how we make it work. I'm not always real good at this. But I do know this. Look for people who need you over people who like you. Ask what you're willing to yield for the benefit of others. Remember who you are. You are his physical presence. You are Emmanuel, God with us, for them.